So welcome everybody to this, another in our series of our Deep Transformation Network live conversations. This one's with Bayo Akomolafe. And the topic we're going to be exploring today is modernity has expired, but what comes next? And just by a little way of context setting, I think pretty much everyone here on the Deep Transformation Network probably has this strong sense that this worldview that is dominant right now, this underlying our ever deepening meta crisis is really defunct. It's this worldview of separation, where it tells us we're split between mind and body, we're separate from each other, we're at odds with the natural world. And the thing is, it's not just dangerous to our future existence of life on Earth, but it's just scientifically invalid. But what I think we need to realize is most of us have been raised within that worldview. And the kind of deeper layers of consciousness, and maybe for some of us not so deep, it probably still retains like a hold on our thoughts and our actions. And one of the questions I feel we all need to ask is, to what extent do those implicit beliefs in that modernity drive how we engage in transformational change? And I ask these questions myself, like how should we elucidate, how much should we kind of have a vision of a future and drive towards it? And how much should we just let it go and just be present in whatever is unfolding right now? And so I'm always asking these questions. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm so delighted to welcome to the DTN today, poet, philosopher, and activist, Bayo Akomolafe. Hey, Bayo, so wonderful to see you. Bayo's joining us from Germany right now. And to explore how we kind of inhabit this kind of challenging, but also potentially liberating space, like as we leave behind the world of modernity and before we arrive at, well, whatever it is, that wherever we might be arriving, that's part of what we'll explore. So in the first half hour, Bayo and I are just going to have a conversation together. And if you have any questions, the thing that you'd like to share with Bayo in the second half of the session, just like we always do, we'll invite you to just ask your questions directly to Bayo, or comments, or whatever you want to share. And if you'd like to share a question or comment, but you're not too comfortable about being in the spotlight, put it in the chat. We'll try to find it. Can't guarantee that everything in the chat will get asked, but we'll try to find the right ones that we can to share with Bayo. And for those who don't already know about Bayo, and lots of people here in the DTN, Bayo, are just great fans of yours, so you got a following. But he's a much loved and celebrated international speaker, teacher, and essayist. He's author of 2 books. He's co-founder of the Emergence Network, and maybe at some point you'll tell us more about that, and chief host of this course series. I love the title of it. It's called We Will Dance with Mountains. So Bayo, as I've just gotten to, obviously we've kind of known about each other and been friendly with each other more distantly for a while, but I've just really been kind of immersing in some of your recent talks. And the more I've seen you talk, the more I felt this deep heart connection with you, my brother. It's so wonderful. And so I'm just looking forward to this conversation. But to begin with, I'd love to ask you just to this topic, because I know we're going to start winding in all kinds of directions, but this topic of modernity and leaving it behind, I'm just kind of curious, maybe to share with us, what do you see as modernity? And what is it that we need to basically leave behind as we move into whatever comes next?
Well, thank you, brother. It's also the same feeling here. I think these times are enlisting us in very, very strange companionships and siblinghood. And we're coming together that way. And I also greet everyone that has showed up here. Yes, I'm waving back at you. Thank you. It's good to be here with you to co-conspire together. So let's see where this conspiracy leads. Let's see what it fruits, what it secretes. It's an interesting question. What is modernity? I'm not usually given to stabilized definitions. as you might already know, brother. The the world is too promiscuous, too unwieldy to sit still long enough for us to describe it. And immediately we describe it, it slips into something else. So that in a sense, everything we can say about modernity is already provisional and speculative, right? But there is a sense we can, that doesn't mean that analysis isn't possible, right? There is a sense in which I often speak about modernity as the flattening of the world to make room for the isolated self, right? It coincides with the rise of agrarian societies, it coincides with the rise of industrialization, rapid technological sophistry, or sophistication rather than sophistry. It coincides with the increased globalization and migrancy and movement of bodies and ideas and concepts. But it seems that what might be speculatively at the heart of modernity is this flattening of the world, this pushing off of ecological agency, so that only the human being might be the agential, might be exclusively powerful. Can I tell a brief story to bring this in more? Can I do that?
Sure.
Okay. I think probably the most fascinating archetype with which I think about modernity is the story of Baldur, Norse mythology. Baldur, the god, is prophesied, there's a prophecy that says Baldur will die. And his mother, Frigga, and his father, Odin, are worried about this. So Frigga does what every good mother who knows that the child is about to die would do, everything possible to save the child. And so she travels across all the realms, and in some capitalist format, she extracts a promise from every human, more than human, and non-human thing, basically saying, you will not harm my son. Right? From lions and sunlight and microbes and everything, you will not touch my son, effectively rendering Baldur impervious to pain. And because Baldur is impervious to pain, he's impervious to pleasure as well. He cannot die. But Loki, who's a trickster, hears that Frigga left a spot, a missing spot. And the missing spot was the mistletoe. She forgot. She did not have a conference with the mistletoe. So Loki fashions a weapon from the mistletoe and hands it over to a god, another god. And that one kills Baldur. And that's the end of the story, so to speak. But I think of modernity as that Baldurian epic. Its desire is to cradle the human individual in a final way. It's deeply identitarian. It's a partition, apartheid logic. And what it wants to do is to separate us from the material realm so that we can find some kind of inner divinity. I'll stop there for now.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And like you say, it's that extractive quality, that sense like we can do everything and we can consume this and consume
We're
that.
indebted to nothing. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
just consume the earth. And one of the points then that becomes so important, because I think like I said, when I kicked off, I think pretty much everyone who's part of this conversation today kind of has the sense of what we need to leave behind. But one of the great questions you ask is, what if the ways we respond to the crisis are actually part of the crisis? And I think we've seen that so much, obviously, like a lot of the time when people are fighting against and seeing the other as the enemy. Even if you win a particular battle, what you're actually doing is actually giving more energy to those forces of separation, right? And so, and so I'd love you to explore that with me more, because I think we need to identify within ourselves and also feel into what does it do to leave that behind? What does that mean to leave that behind?
Here's my controversial take on this. I think the efforts to leave modernity behind are modernity's last efforts to preserve itself.
Mm. Mm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That there is a sense in which here I framed it this way while sharing in Rwanda, I think a couple of years ago. Everyone was going on about thinking out the box. And I remember saying, you probably have heard this. I remember saying, when they asked me to get up on stage and speak, I said, thinking out the box is exactly how boxes think, right? There's a sense in which we are still deploying categories of thought that are distinctly and distinctively modern when we think we can abandon it, right? Because to presume we can abandon it is to already assume we are separate from the worlds we are co-creating, right? Which is exactly modernity's arrangement. Right. Modernity says you're separate. And then we say, the only way to leave this realm of separation behind is to separate ourselves even further. Right. So it's what I would suggest is that we disturb the idea of modernity being exclusively itself. Right. That by touching the box, instead of trying to jump outside of it, because that's what the box wants you to do, so that it can preserve its boxiness, right? By touching the box, by feeling for its cracks, we might get a sense of its duplicity. And this is where the trickster archetype comes in. But that's a different conversation. Let's see where you want to go with this.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm just trying to hold this right now because I'm feeling like we kind of recognize there is this box and it's not just a box, but it's one that is destroying life on Earth. It's causing just incredible suffering among the rest of our human brothers and sisters, and it's destroying so much of life and doing it at a faster and faster pace. And so this is a key challenge for me. And so let me just try to explain it and see if you can help me kind of work through it, because a lot of the time when we have, we hear things, and I think you are an absolute master at putting these ideas out of, like one of the things a lot of people know you by is that incredible sort of comment of like, things are getting worse and worse. Like we've got to do everything right now. And so this is what we need to do, is to slow down. And love it. Beautiful. And I just feel it in my heart when I hear that. But then there's this other part of me that goes like, what do we say? Like someone who's like joining an Extinction Rebellion demonstration in London, and they're going and they're seeing the monster destroying life, and we've got to do something against it. And oftentimes we will have sort of I've got friends or people who sort of who might react to those kind of action-oriented, goal-oriented activists by saying, just let things be. And I'm going, but these corporate executives, the ones who are destroying the earth, they're very goal-oriented. They know what they're doing, and they've got their lobbyists and their lawyers, and they're working out. And so while we're sort of just trying to feel into what it means to be alive or be present, they meanwhile they're knocking down the door and not just, and we can't just let them, we can't ignore them, because they end up killing our sisters, brothers, and ourselves ultimately. So how do you work through that? I think that's the core of my question about that, the whole, that whole sense of basically letting go of that sort of goal orientation, whatever it might be.
The phrase is, the times are urgent, let us slow down. And I've been saying this for some time. I remember the first time I shared it in public. I think it was 2004. or 2010, I can't remember, in the early 2000s in South Africa. And I remember a German brother saying to me that, you know what, I'm going to take this, I'm going to slow down. So he went back home and then he tried to slow down. Just follow me just for a bit.
Yeah.
And then he writes to me eventually and says, it's not working. I mean, there are things that we need to do now. I mean, I was typing the memo to the office slowly. I really wanted to take this slow imperative seriously, but it's not working. It just seems to be getting in the way of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote back to him what I will say now to you, that slowing down is not a function of speed at all, right? It's not the urgency is not a matter of speed.
Mm-hmm.
It's that modernity is itself a kind of temporality,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of time. It secretes and arranges our bodies so that we sense and understand time in a particular way, right? We act from this traumatized space of thinking of time by reinforcing it with techno-bureaucratic solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which often reinforce the very conditions we're trying to exit from.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the fairly recent headlines from Denmark. A municipality in Denmark attempts to clear the beach of plastic and debris. It's one of my favorite examples.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it. They take $140,000 or $170,000 and they get tractors out there and they clear those beaches, right? And then they turn around and they throw the same debris in the ocean so that it only comes back to them. And the papers reported this by saying, what the hell are you doing? This doesn't make any sense. But that is just a microcosm of our near universal responses to these crises, at some level.
Mm-hmm.
So slowing down is not a function of speed. It is a function of posture.
Yeah,
right?
posture.
It's posture, right? It's not a dismissal of temporal urgency. It is a calling into question the ways that we are complicit in secreting and reproducing the very things that we're trying to upend.
Yes.
Right? That even a solution can have the germ of the problem inside it. Right?
Yeah.
But I'll go ahead. You want to say something?
I love it. This is relating so much. I'm really feeling it in my being, Bayo, because I was actually just sharing with some friends the other day. Like I've noticed just for me in the last month or so, because I'm working on a book I want to talk with you about in a moment too, because this also relates to this topic. But it's this book about an ecological civilization and what's possible in the future. And I noticed myself feeling so much pressure internally that my body was feeling it. It was beginning to tell me like, hey, there's something not quite right. And I've been really working on this place of like this kind of deep relaxation at a deeper layer in my being. And to your very point, what I've noticed is that I can accomplish the same thing in a day, but I can do it in this place of calmness, as if at a deeper layer, I can still feel all the things that need to be done, but I can be holding it and at a deeper place to say, that's okay. There's a place of well-being. And sometimes I often sometimes in kind of deep places, if I'm doing maybe medicine journey or something like that, I'll find myself in this place where I almost feel I can't allow myself to really relax and feel good because there's so much suffering out there and I'm in a place of privilege and it's just not allowable, it seems, to allow that. And then I think a greater wisdom in me says, if I do allow that joy, that real place of deep relaxation, I can actually be more effective in offering something positive into the world. And it sounds like does that sound like to you what a reflection of what you're saying? Or
I would love to help with a figure. It's not a metaphor, but it's an entomological phenomenon that might help render this a tad bit more explicit. I've been
Right.
using the seemingly helpful idea of death traps. You know what a death trap is,
Yeah,
brother?
yeah. Why don't you describe it for other people? I
A
love
death
this.
trap is, for those of you who love ants and study ants, it's another name for it is ant milling, right? Ant milling. It's when you see ants going around in circles. I don't know if anyone here has seen that. The ants, people have observed death traps, and I'll tell you why it's called a death trap. As large as a stadium,
Wow, that big.
yes, they just kept going round. They can be as large as that, as several fields, and they could be as tiny as could fit on your table, right?
Wow.
But what defines a death trap is pheromone carcerality, right? So ants, of course, secrete pheromones to give directions to each other. These particular ants are the army ants. They are blind. So they have no other way to tell where they're going except by pheromone secretion.
Right.
A pheromone is chemical. So they tell themselves where they're going and what to do by that pheromone secretion. But sometimes they fall into an accident, and this pheromone trail becomes a loop, and they keep going round and round in circles. They do it so hard and so passionately that they stay in that circle. There's no way to break out of the trance, and they die out of exhaustion from walking round and round. Now, tell me if it matters if they're going slow or fast.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Like at some point, there's this conversation today between what people term as slowing down and a relatively neo-Marxist strand of thought called accelerationism. Right?
I don't know that.
Accelerationism is we can cut off the throat of capitalist oppression if we speed up its incongruencies and its contradictions.
Oh, I see. Right.
So instead of trying to solve problems, let things just go haywire. Let's just let the shit hit the fan, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like whether we're going fast or slow, we're trapped.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I even jokingly offer, I often say that those ants probably have motivational speakers among them, urging them to keep on going. Like, you can
Right,
make
exactly.
it. You can do it. We're almost there, but they're going around in circles and they die in exhaustion.
Exactly.
The only thing that breaks a pheromone trail of that order is an infection, is a break of some kind.
Yeah, that's interesting. An infection, like
Yes.
something that's not fitting, something that breaks.
Something that doesn't fit, something outside of the economy or the logic of the circle.
Yeah.
Breaks into the circle. Yes.
And so, when you're talking about that, when I'm applying that to what I see around me, it's like things like, techno modernism or whatever, or like, how do we deal with climate? Well, it like just invest in more renewables, and that's gonna, and all these kind of hopeful things, but they end up actually just adding fuel to the whole concept. There's this concept from the 19th century economist school that like the Jevons paradox, which is that everything all the way from the steam engine invention onwards, everything that's meant to reduce our needs for more fuel or more inputs ends up, because it's more efficient within capitalism, it ends up increasing the amount of activity rather than reducing. So so that's exactly like the ants going around. So here's the thing, like what I'm putting a huge amount of my time on right now. I'm just finishing this kind of research mode. I'm about to start writing this book about this vision that not just my vision, but so many people around the world are holding it, of like what we call an ecological civilization, like the idea of what would it be if we actually shifted our absolute foundations of our civilization. So rather than it being one that's wealth affirming and like all based on extraction and exploitation, it's one that's based on setting the conditions for all of life to flourish on a regenerated earth, for all human beings to flourish with the rest of non-human nature. And looking at how everything would be totally fundamentally different, whether it's education, whether it's urban design, whether it's technology, or of course economics, or how money is just everything. But so here's my question to you. I feel driven to get these ideas out in the world. But then I come back to one of these kind of paradoxes again, because there's this other part of me when I think of that notion of modernity and outcome orientation and stuff like that. I go, to what extent should we sort of let go of some clear sense of this is where we need to go, and just really be with the present, let the Tao unfold itself, let the path take its path? And to what extent should there be, like sometimes I feel it in terms of almost like as things get darker, like one little bright light of what's possible can actually be this way in which we can kind of shift attractors, basically, if we think of like a phase transition towards something that's more positive. So I'd love you to tell me how you see that paradox between that. And even, I mean, it feels like to me, this is a good goal. This is like, but it's not so much a goal, but more like this vision of, but how do we hold that and just versus just being present with whatever unfolds?
What I would like to stress, what I would like to emphasize, and it might be humbling to articulate this, and there's no full way to articulate, no encyclopedic way to articulate this, is how utterly indebted we are to the world at large for how transformations occur, right? Up till now, we have depended on the myth of the neoliberal traditional individual who has agency. I want to stress having, right? As a property, the human owns agency and can do as it wills, right? But that idea is deeply flawed and increasingly difficult to sustain as we start to see how our bodies are entangled with the world at large, right? So let me bring this to your attention, brother. A French artist had this vocation, this commission to imagine the year 2000 in the year 1899. Right?
Right. Yeah.
You know this story.
No, but I'm
you've
curious.
heard of this.
I'm curious.
So he did a good job. He imagined the ordinary, everyday life in the year 2000, right, in Europe. And so he painted people flying in cars. Right. I haven't seen one lately, but he painted people flying in cars. They didn't look like drones or anything. Those cars looked like boats with bat wings attached. And this was to him what was technological sophistication to him. He drew, he painted handmaiden, servants in people's homes with automated machines, right? This crude retrogressive or, notion of technological advancement. And then he drew fashion. The way he depicted fashion in the year 2000 looks nothing like how we dress today, how you and I are dressing right now. This guy had a large feather on his hat, and he seemed to have paint all over his body. I think this was light clothing, and he had a walking stick, right? And this to him was the year 2000, and it was hailed as beautiful works of art. My point here is this French artist's drawings looked like the year he was in, right?
Yes.
He could not have imagined Twitter. There was no way he could have imagined mobile phones, the most ordinary things in our time now. He could not have imagined these things, and not his fault. We think like our ecologies. We don't think independently of our surroundings, which is just a fancy way of coming to the question in with a postural shift by noticing that sometimes when we imagine what comes next, we
Mhm.
are in some molecular, subconscious fashion, repeating the same algorithms that we're trying to escape,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Right? Like,
Yes.
I know of many projects, fascinating experiments that have tried to build on a manifesto of what the next looks like, of
Mhm.
what a post-Westphalian nationalist order
Right.
looks like.
Right.
What does
Right.
it mean to live beyond nation states? Well, I don't know how to imagine that because all I've grown up in is a nation state system, right? So there is a sense in which we are severely limited in how we
Mhm.
can approach this, and that calls for humility, right? So
Yes.
the thing for me here is that the places where we fail, the places where we struggle to articulate what comes next are generative in fugitive ways. They're inviting us to stay longer than usual instead of rushing off into another solutionism, a
Mhm.
fixed notion of what comes next.
Yeah. It's it's so interesting to me, Bayo. Do you know that quote? I bet you do. That's attributed to Frederick Jameson. Like for most people, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Yes,
And
there you go.
so it's to your point exactly. It's really interesting idea because a part of what I really feel like I'm investing my time in right now is to help people to imagine a different world, like that is a non-capitalistic world. And yet, to your point, to what extent, no matter what we try to do, are we just bringing our preconceptions, even the ones we think believe we've left behind,
Yeah.
into that future imagining? But on the other
Yeah.
hand, without some imagination, what power do we have to move towards that place?
Um, when I suggest that imagination is limited, I do not think that imagination is totalized, right? Or totally captured.
Right.
But
Okay.
we are doing our darndest. And by we, I don't just mean humans. I mean architecture of the city, what
Right.
we eat,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what's in return, how we feed, how we greet each other.
Mhm.
These seemingly molecular processes sustain what I call white modernity, right? And by white modernity, I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about whiteness as a
Right.
terraforming
Mhm.
principle that
Right.
captured white people as well as people who
Exactly.
look like me, right?
Exactly.
So it's not that imagination is totally captured, it's that the spaces where whiteness has not fully captured are the cracks. This is why I speak a lot about
Yeah.
cracks and ruptures. And I
Yes.
feel and I feel that is where new imagination thrives
Mhm.
and new possibilities.
Love that. That's so beautiful. And I'm I'm also noticing the time. I'm so enjoying just kind of really going deep with you on my own questions. By I don't want to take the space from others too. And so um, right around now, I want to kind of be prepared to open the space so
Yeah.
others can share their ideas and questions with you. So I'm inviting anybody to start to put your Zoom hands up if you want to sort of get in line to join in the conversation. But as people are doing that, I really liked what you were just saying about whiteness. And one of the things I was really picking up from you is I love how you're taking that concept of whiteness and blackness and taking them away from skin color and into those two different mindsets. And do you want to just say a little bit more about how you see blackness also in contrast to whiteness, recognizing we're not talking about the fact that my skin is perceived by people as being, quote, white or yours is black, but a different way of living in the world.
Right. I'm presently reading the fascinating stories of how Italians were made white. For instance, there was once a time, yes, there was once a time when in the United States, Italians were considered lower than the Negroes,
Mm.
right? So, so,
Oh
so
my God.
this is nothing to do with, of course, eventually the Italians were accepted into whiteness, right? It was easier to do that. But there is a sense in which, Jeremy, I come from one of the whitest nations on earth, right? I come from Nigeria. It's the blackest country on earth, 300 million Black people. Yes, and the Irish, brother, thank you. Nigeria is pretty Black, in terms of skin color, but we're very white because whiteness is orientation. Whiteness is cartography. Whiteness is how bodies are oriented with space and time. So it's an apartheid partition logic that we're speaking about here. It's neurotypicality. When I speak about Blackness, I'm not speaking about the identitarian Blackness. Right. Yeah. It's easy to distinguish that one, but there's no time for that, I sense. But Blackness is the invitation of the world to collapse colonial structures. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, I love that. Well, I'm feeling very Black right now with that. And let's pass to Ken, who was the first to put his hand up. Hey there, Ken. How you doing?
Hello, Jeremy. Thank you very much, Bayo. Thank you very much. I really enjoy listening to you. I love your language. I think many of us are trying to break free of this monster that has a grip upon us. Some of the language that has become really interesting to me of late is Timothy Morton's notion of a hyper object.
Yep.
And in relation to that, the Nate Hagen speaks of the superorganism. And I've heard people speaking of Moloch, the monster. And I'm wondering if you might have a story that you could share with us that could bring Moloch to life. And I want to just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. I do have a story, and I'm presently writing that story in my new book, A Pedagogy of the Cracks. And this story is about, I borrow it from Greek mythology. Now, Gaia, Gaia, who is mother of the gods and the Titans as well, had special kids called hecatoncheires, right? They had 100 heads and 100 arms, and there were 3 of them, right? I've been playing with this beautiful invitation, probably known to those in the academic world as speculative fabulation. So I'm taking a story, embracing the power of the false, which is not a lie, but is a twisting of the world so that we can see it in different ways. It's a technology, so to speak. And I have been positing the existence of a 4th one, right? A 4th hecatoncheire. And this hecatoncheire escaped, the 1000, the Titanomachy, which is the war between the Titans and the Olympiads. And it became modernity, right? Its back tattooed with the street signs that we have, right? All the tattoos on its body became all the algorithms and the patterns that we adopt today. And this is just a way of noticing that we are subspecies in a larger conglomeration or assemblage of bodies. We are not acting upon the world, we are acting with and within the world, right? We're not separate from it. So this story of a giant that escaped and buried its body, and its body became the modern public order, is how I'm telling the story of larger, primordial, you might even say tehomic imperatives at large. And our work is to sit with these cracks in the body so that we can become enfleshed differently. If we try to act from a neoliberal idea that we can change the world, well, we have proven time and time again that we are pretty bad at wielding agency. So agency is a matter of crossroads, not highways. Yeah, we have to be met and we have to meet in order to see differently.
Yeah. Beautiful. Wow, thanks, Bayo. I love that story. Thank you, Ken. And then before we turn to you, Larissa, I wanted to share some questions from the chat. Jaya Kik, I'm not sure, Jaya, if I pronounced your name right, so sorry if I got it wrong, but they had a few, almost, there was a series of questions in the chat, so I'll try to come up with the, it's kind of primarily based about systems, and they say, what if the political systems, the decision makers, are even if they wanted to act, it's like they can't, because the monetary system is creating this like human self-annihilation. And so even it's not an issue of greedy people or even evil people, but the actual system out that we're all part of. And what does that mean? How can we change? So I guess the question, as I see it, is how do we change systems themselves, which are so needed? A little bit like the ants running around. So even if we want to do right, but if the system is forcing that against us.
Right. I think behavior is ecological. I think I've implied that already. You can get a community organizer like Obama and put him in the White House, and he will behave like the state apparatus, despite the fact that he was this wonderful, eloquent community organizer that we all loved. Right. So there is a sense in which it's not entirely left to us. We are part and parcel of a room that is still finding itself, right? I think of cracks. I don't know if there's time or space to speak about what I mean by cracks.
Go ahead, Bayo,
flows and processes. Oh, it'll take days to get through it. But the idea, I'm trying to see if I can simplify, which is not exactly my strength. I move with trickster energy, which is to complexify and not simplify stuff. But your question is how do we exploit, or how do we work within systems to change systems? Would that be a fair interpretation?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm speaking for Jaya, but I that's how I interpret it. Yeah.
Well, there's always a risk. There's always a risk. Working within systems, there's even something hubristic about the idea of working within systems, as if we were separate from the systems we were working with. Our bodies do not precede systems, or our bodies do not precede ecologies. Our bodies are ecologies in their specificity, right? So when you're thinking about how to pull capitalism down, it's actually capitalism thinking about its own alterity and how to pull itself down.
Same as the box,
right. In just the same way that I often say that the fugitive that escapes the plantation is an extension and a deterritorialization, fancy word, of the plantation, right? The fugitive extends the plantation. This is a beautiful way of noticing that the world is constantly spilling. Boundaries are dynamic. Things are never still. The real question, I guess, is how do we make novelty and exquisite new possibilities resilient? And that's another conversation. How do we stay with fugitivity long enough so that it becomes new social arrangements, right? Someone said here in the chat a while ago that, it happened with COVID, but we got back to normal. COVID was like a crack. It disrupted everything. It changed our notions of schooling and work and intensity and relationship and greeting and touch. It disrupted everything. But what did we try to do? To get back to normal, right? So in some sense, brother, the world is constantly bleeding, constantly opening its pores in ways that are discernible, in ways that are intelligible, and in most of the time in ways that are not discernible, just like meteors crashing on the planet are, happening all the time, but we don't sense it. We don't know all the time that it's happening. But to the degree that we can know, we can convene a politics of inquiry around these cracks. And I think doing that might orient us differently.
Love that. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bayo. And let's turn to Larissa. Been waiting patiently. Hey, Larissa, great to see you.
Hi, thank you both very much. Bayo, I often have a difficulty understanding a lot of your complex syntheses, but fortunately today I didn't have that difficulty. And when you were talking about, the question that I find so illuminating, what if the ways we respond are part of maintaining the problems that we're trying to respond to? That to me is the question. And when you and Jeremy were talking, and Jeremy, you were expressing the difficulties, the struggle you have, sort of coming to terms with the implications of that. I was thinking about the discourse of left-right brain domination, and how that throws light on the present state of the world, the trauma-driven behaviors that we're all part of, and whether that could be a route, a path out of what you're talking about. We need to do what the shamans call stepping out of the stream of time into some space where where we are not being driven by amygdala-based responses and versions of reality. So I'd be interested to hear what you think on that.
Auntie, thank you so much. My movements and orientations aren't usually anchored to the promise of clarity. So when it does happen, I'm usually grateful, right? Because I feel like my gift is disruption. But what you say is beautiful, because I think in terms of shamanic realities too, and how we are stuck. I just want to emphasize this, that the problem here isn't death, right? This is the problem for climate scientists, for instance, eventual annihilation or death. I don't think that's even the problem. The real problem, what's at stake, is sensorial capture. That is, in a sense, we are trapped in a way of sensing the world, of relating with the world that we need a break from. And by break, I don't mean to step back in the ways that an entrepreneur might go retreat in the Swiss Alps, and go skiing so that he can have some vision of something else in the future. I mean a break. I mean that sometimes the sacred penetrates the mundane by breaking its exclusivity. Stories from the Bible, for instance, about God blessing Jacob with a new name, but before doing that, breaking his thigh. Or how does the Bible put it again? Smiting his thigh. Smiting is more epic, I guess, right? Smiting the thigh and causing him to limp, right? With the infection comes an inflection, right? With the disability comes new choreographies, new ways of seeing. And this is why a Yoruba Babalawo, who is like a shaman, when he wants to help you get better, comes and approaches you with a knife. You have to spill before you become whole, if you will, right? He opens you up, there is some laceration there. And our cultures have always embraced laceration as a way of becoming other, as holding death close so that we can live fruitfully. So you're right, I agree. We need shamanic rationalities to break the trance of this modern entrapment. And they're around us everywhere. We just need a different parallax posture to see it differently. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that great question, Larissa.
Thank you, Auntie.
And over to you, Fran. Fran, it's wonderful to see you here today. Welcome, dear friend.
Yes. Well, let me just say I am appreciating the profoundness of this conversation, and Bayo, of your really
yes, Auntie.
deep thinking about the problems in which we are caught. So I think you mentioned the word surprises at some point, and there's a paradox to my question.
Okay.
Because a surprise is a surprise. But I'm wondering if you have any ideas about what some surprises might be that lie ahead that would cause us to make some of the shifts that you are talking about. Thank you.
Auntie, could you say something more about this? What you mean by us? Are you referring to society at large, or could you say more about this question? I'm trying to situate it properly.
Yeah.
Well, as we project into the future,
Yeah.
and of course, our tendency to project into the future what we have now,
Yes.
is somehow further elaborated, like your French
Yes.
painter. And yet, what we know
Mm.
is that the future will be full of surprises that we absolutely did not project.
Yes.
Some of those surprises in the way we function,
Mm-hmm.
we as a whole,
Yes.
some of those surprises will be part of the transition that we need to make. And I am
Indeed.
wondering whether you have some hunches about what some of those surprises might be.
I have a sense, a very palpable sense that modernity has coddled us in this safe space where we believe that intelligence is ours and agency is ours, right? The way we speak about it in those traditions, a humanist tradition, is to think about the world's best things, beauty, value, as only discernible by humans. And so modernity creates these technologies to reinforce that idea. But sometimes the goal of modernity becomes its excess, its unanticipated surprises. For instance, and I dare say that artificial intelligences are disrupting our claims to exclusive intelligence. And now you might argue with that and say, no, that's just a copycat system. You know, the world doesn't think, you know, that's just computers and stuff. But I'm still stuck on that beautiful animated feature, Toy Story, about things living at night, right? When we leave the room, that's when they have their parties. And I come from a tradition, right? I come from a tradition that thinks about the world in that way, that the world is constantly humbling us. It's too promiscuous to fit into any one frame of mind. So what if we don't have intelligence? What if intelligence has us? And what if intelligence enlists us and other bodies in how it comes to materialize itself? What if plastic has a voice? What if trees are more intelligent or communicate in more fascinating ways than our internet and social technologies can ever do, right? So I think we're in for a ride in noticing, you know, in our very attempt to concretize our claims to specialness, to exclusivity, we're going to be meeting the world more and more and learning that we're not all that, right? We're not as well put together as we think we are, right? And that is humbling and fascinating and simultaneously liberating. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thanks for that. That's a wonderful question, Fran. Great to see you. And before we turn to Roberto, let me just share a couple of things also from the chat. One is just kind of adding what you were just saying, something that David Berg was putting in the chat was, is the shift that we're talking about more of an issue of shifting from the how to the who? Which so relates to what you were just saying, Bayo. But I wanted to also share with you a question from Till Hopstock, who said, I see humility being related to wisdom. And how can we create or contribute to create a new sense of respect for the dignity and sacredness and sanctity of life?
I'm gonna blaze through a story from West Africa
Okay.
to get this one, to communicate and articulate this one. You probably have heard the story of the tortoise who annoys the gods by claiming that he can be wiser than them. And so the gods say, okay, show us. And the tortoise is the trickster from Yoruba lands. There's Anansi the spider in Ghana, right? But the tortoise is quite unique to Yoruba cosmology. And so the tortoise does what Frigga tries to do, right? The tortoise travels around the world with a calabash around its neck, right here in front. And it takes everything. It takes Jeremy's wisdoms, takes Roberto's wisdoms, takes Miriam's wisdoms, takes everything, more than human and human wisdom, and stuffs it in its calabash. And when it is saturated, convinces itself that, yeah, I'm the wisest now. But now I need to hide my knowledge. I need to hide all this wisdom. I need to store it somewhere. It decides eventually that it's going to hide this knowledge atop a very tall tree. The problem is that the tortoise has abbreviated limbs and cannot quite grasp the tree, especially with a calabash on its neck. So it climbs and climbs and it falls down to the ground, climbs again, and it keeps falling. Meanwhile, the stupidest animal within our cosmology, there are many iterations of this story, the grasshopper is watching, and the grasshopper is chuckling to itself, and it hops out and says to the tortoise, why don't you just put the calabash on your back? See if that helps, and hops away. And so the tortoise realizes its horrible mission, that it hasn't been for good all this while. My idea of wisdom needs to be reframed, because if I have all knowledge and I'm still this stupid, then maybe wisdom is not the accretion of knowledge, right? And maybe that's the point here. I think of wisdom as that which exists after everything we know has been known, right? Wisdom is an impediment, an obstacle. Wisdom is when the world crosses us out and meets us halfway. So wisdom is not just cumulative. Wisdom is like the road punching its back and resisting continuity and mobility. That's wisdom. So wisdom, in the words of Wendell Berry, it is the impeded stream that sings, right? Wisdom is the singing of impediment. It's where we meet an obstacle so severe that we cannot continue on our tracks. That's when the world offers us an opportunity to shape shift. We can either blast through it, which is what modernity tries to do, blast that mountain and build a parking lot, or we can interact with the obstacle and become a different kind of species. That's what wisdom does.
So it sounds like wisdom is transformational in that way.
It's transformational.
When we
it's
allow
transversal.
it.
It's transversal. Right? Yeah.
Well,
Not universal, but transversal.
Yeah.
It's a crossing through, not a highway, but a crossroads.
Well, thanks for that, Bayo. And let's turn to Roberto. If you want to join us. Hey, Roberto. Good to see you.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you so much. I am speechless, but I have a few words. First, I have to tell you that I surrendered. I surrendered to your poetic intelligence, and I have to declare to you that I love you. It's te amo in Spanish.
I love you too.
You are incredible. You are incredible, really. The way you think, the way you feel,
Thank you.
the way
Thank you,
you
big
come,
brother.
and the way you are so generous with everything that you share. And just like my curiosity, what did you have for breakfast? Where do you come from? Because you at least to me, you make my soul tremble with your words. So I'm just trembling in a very nice way. You're shaking everything with this way of perceiving and of at the same time putting in words, in thoughts and in words this perception. So the question is, how did you acquire that capacity? Where did you learn it? Where was it given to you? this poetic sense of view of perceiving that is from where you're coming.
Oh, that's a lot. That stumped me. Thank you so much, big brother. I had cottage cheese and something else for breakfast. I can't remember, but I love cottage cheese. So if I travel and I meet any of you, it's either ice cream or cottage cheese. That's my thing. I'm a sweet tooth. And then I am not wise. I'm not wise. I don't think wisdom in that way. I don't think wisdom as a property, as going by the story I just told. I'm going to repeat this macabre, possibly offensive statement by, what's his name? The most famous British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. It's the times. Right. It's the times. There's a sense in which wisdom does not belong to specific bodies. Wisdom is territorial, right? It's atmospheric. And that's why my son, who is autistic and 5 years old, is wiser than well, by way of language. Language is so machinic and clunky. It gets in the way of this expression. But for the sake of our conversation, I want to say my son is wiser than I am. I'll tell you this one quickly. My son celebrates Christmas every day, unironically, not in the way that children wish it were Christmas, but he celebrates Christmas every day. I have a Santa Claus costume. Sometimes I have to wear it to feed him, right? And one day I woke up and I tried to convince him. I said, you really know it's not Christmas, right? Christmas is December 25th. And he had this look of despair on his face, like his mode of perception and his mode of understanding temporality and time was radically different from mine and was inviting me to come out of my box, to disturb that circle. He said, but Dada, it is Christmas. That's all he said. It is Christmas. Unironically, he believes it's Christmas. I think that is wisdom. Wisdom is that which gets in the way so that we can shapeshift differently. So I don't know how to be wise. I have good sounding words. I'm deeply flawed. I am no guru. And I'm just sorting it out and wandering along this path like everybody else is. And I like cottage cheese, I guess. So it's that these times are enlisting us in ways that are unexpected. It will enlist trees. It will enlist ChatGPT, which might put on your feet or on your computer that which you need for a day. It might enlist autistic kids. Who knows? The world is too promiscuous.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have ice cream on my fridge just in case we cross. But anyway, I love you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roberto.
I love you too.
And I echo what Roberto said, like, you make my soul tremble. It's and turning to Randall. You want to join us, Randall?
Hi, yeah. Thank you, Bayo. I just want to appreciate your thoughts about crossroads and this notion of meeting. And so to maybe think about some different words for that, and also sort of understanding the hunger in that of how do we sort of temporarily become something else other than, you know, how we see ourselves right now. So one of the thoughts I've been working with is hybridity. There's this idea, you know, I think it was Lynn Margulis, who's a biologist, who talked a lot about symbiosis. And just long story short, I think one of the fastest ways to become something different, to evolve, is to acquire another genome, right? So that reminds me of this, you know, of your metaphor of the crossroads, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so that might be a way of, changing our normals,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Fast, if we want to go fast
yeah,
versus
yeah,
go far.
yeah.
Do you have any
That's a
stories
question.
about that?
I mean, I could just extend the story that I started with the pheromone trail
Yeah.
and those ants in their exhausted circle, right? And one, I was saying that the only thing that could disrupt the trance of that circle is that an outside logic, something outside, so to speak, it's an immanent transcendence or a transcendent immanence, something outside of that loop interrupts the circle. And one of the ways that the forest interrupts the circle is with sporulation, the sporulation of a fungal entity called Ophiocodiceps unilateralis. Jeremy, you know this one, right?
You've gone beyond my level.
Codiceps is fungal, it's fungi, and it breeds and it spills its spores into the ants, the insects, right? And those spores go into the ant's body and they hybridize, Randall, they hybridize the ant's body so that the ant becomes a crossroad,
Right.
right? So so the name for this is a zombie ant, because now the ant is unable to resist a different orientation. The ant starts to traipse off the path and it goes away into the forest and finds a leaf and digs its mandibles into the leaf, and then it becomes a fungal station. This is nature's art. If I don't like to use the word nature, it's deeply colonial, but that's art on a different level. So I think we are constantly otherwise. We are constantly hybridized. We don't always feel it, but Yoruba cosmologies, especially Afro-diasporic spiritualities already sensed this, that bodies are not impervious to possession. And so part of their rituals, for instance, is to open their bodies to Eshu, or open their bodies to Ogun, or open their bodies to Oshun, one of the deities, some of the deities in the Orisha cosmology. We are always hybridized. The trick here is, how do we follow along the lines of hybridization, call and convene a politics or community along those experimental lines? It's like following desire. Jeremy, you know the Little Prince? Did you watch the cartoon, The
Love
Little
the Little
Prince?
Prince so
You watched
much.
The Little Prince, right? He would catch a comet and sail away. I'm getting goosebumps just remembering the cartoon, right? The Little Prince would sail away. I think we need a sailing away, but we'll only sail away along the lines of breaks and cracks, not to transcend, but to disturb the exclusivity of the familiar.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great. And I'm looking at the time, we only have about 5 minutes left to our scheduled session.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we have three more questions. So I think we can let's try to get all of these our last three voices into the room in just these last few minutes we have, if we can manage that. And so to turn to David. Hey there.
Hi, Jeremy. Good to see you again. And
Big brother.
Hey, good to see you. Love your stories. Love them. The story of your son made me think of Nightmare Before Christmas. So
he's on that. He's on that, right?
Because the idea is that he Jack, the skeleton, hears the story of Christmas, tries to bring that story into his time, but he does it through his own categories, which is what you're saying to do.
Yes.
And therefore distorts it. So the question is, how do we become people of Christmas, so to speak?
How do we become people of Christmas? I'm going to write that down.
How do we become 22nd century people in this century so that we can make that shift?
Yes. Well, it goes along the lines of what I've been saying previously, we need to notice that we are, I'm going to use biblical language here. We're dealing with principalities and powers, right? Territorial flows that are larger than this neoliberal myth that all we need to do is look in the mirror and change the world. It's such hubris, you know. So the thing here is we need to study those patterns, those algorithms, and cracks are invitations. They're generative, hospitable places of new speciation. I wish I had more time to speak about cracks, but I think of them as, for instance, not just pandemics, but even autism, right? Like anything that deviates from the pattern of the human, which the modern recommends, is a crack.
Yeah.
A crack is errancy. It's like straying away from the image when the image spills, right? But modernity maintains itself by pushing the spillage back into the ship, almost in the way that captains that captured Black bodies from Africa preserved their captives by making them safe, right? So they knew that some of the time those slaves would jump out of the ships just to end their lives rather than go with the whole thing. Then the captain started to build safety nets. They called them safety nets around the ships. I mean, they could have said, we care about your safety, and it would have made sense, right, on the ship. So there's a sense in which we are preserving the image, and maybe a politics that pursues the animacy of errancy, that follows it, that accompanies errancy instead of trying to rehabilitate it, is the kind of politics you're talking about, right? And there are actually historical examples. I could tell you the story of a French visionary called Deligny, who saved kids from the asylum post-Second World War, refuses to rehabilitate them, and then just follows them in the rocky hills of southern France. Just followed them and traced their footsteps, and found out one day that those kids were accidentally tracing out underground water that he could not hear and others could not hear. That those autistic children, they didn't speak, they were tracing out underground water flows.
Wow. Amazing story, Bayo. Thanks.
Thank you.
And so let's turn to this Isias. Wonderful to see you here, Isias. And then we'll finish with Diana, and then we'll call it to a close. Then.
Yes. Thank you very much for this very interesting and engaging and inspiring talk, both of you. And Bayoko, your mystic imageries and language, which is really bringing our psyche into the present moment and inhabit this or try to find and identify those cracks. So my question was about finding or identifying those cracks. I work in education, so I'm a teacher. I teach architecture. So it's for me, it's also like, how do you identify these cracks and hold the space within the limits of academia? So so if you have any suggestions, it would be it's a very practical question. But
it is, but it's not impossible to respond to, I reckon. I remember a student of mine in the university in Nigeria, Covenant University, coming to me once, just came to my office and was tired and said, I had an argument with the lecturer, the professor, a certain professor. And because I had a difference of opinion, I was given an F in this professor's course. And I remember saying to this student that I would like you to take that F and laminate it and hang it on your wall. And when you grow and you have children, I would like you to point to that F and say, this is deep intelligence, right? Right. And I don't know if he has kids now, but he took to it. The idea here is failure is strangely generative, right? we know how to pathologize it, to distance it, to put it in a box, because modernity cannot tolerate too much of it. So we pathologize it, we put it in the asylum and all that. I think what we want to do is to stay with failure. Failure as errancy, failure as when things don't go according to plan, as a crack, as a moment when something else is crystallizing, right? So in the academic context, for instance, there is a sense in which higher education globally is failing. You might agree with me, right? There's a sense in which a lot of people are rushing to tenured positions because that's the only way to preserve themselves, to pay the bills, right? To live. But at another scale, a deeper form of intelligence or knowing is gaining body, if you will. Across the world, there are experiments like in Rajasthan in India, there's a university that is called Swaraj University. There's no grades, there's no CGPA, there's no convocation, there's no discipline. It's highly experimental. The students are not called students, they're called seekers, right? And they have this communal approach to creating transdisciplinarity. You invent your own subject and the community supports you to do this. Yes, Manish Jain, thank you, you can check him out. So I would invite you to practice what those slaves in exile practiced. That is, hide your fugitive technologies within the buoyant systems, the systems of legacy institutions. Sneak it in, practice stowaway politics, slip all those things in and let them find a life, just like fungi, slip into ants and live in different ways. That's how we hack the exclusivity of the familiar. We have to slip in some way, right? And maybe that might be useful to you in your local and specific circumstances.
Thank you. I do it a little bit, actually. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Love that. And so, yeah, I'm seeing we're a little bit beyond our time. And let's turn to Diana. And if it's okay with you, Bayo, to take one more question.
Yeah,
and then, then we'll close. Hey there, Diana.
Yes, from Auntie Diana.
I'll be really quick too. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm in a big crack and have been for a while, just lots of life changes. I'm rural instead of urban. I'm grandma instead of just, person living in the city. I've been so looking forward to hearing what you had to say, and it's going to be really percolating. I've also been a lifelong activist, and because I'm now rural, I can't participate, but I'm in touch with my friends and not many people show up. And, it feels like what we're doing hasn't been working.
Yeah.
And anyways, I just want to say thank you. And the other thing is it's very stressful. And we've had wildfires in, near where I live and that sort of thing. And through the panic, what has helped me through has been finding any choir I can and singing. That's just these days. Anyways, comments and just a huge thank you.
Thank you so much, Auntie. And I hope you are met and surrounded and supported as we experience the flailing of white modernity. And I hope these intelligences meet you in a way that is supportive for those you love. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. And well, Bayo, I really can't say it better than what Roberto said. You make my soul tremble. And I've been feeling that as I've been watching you give other talks, and I felt it all through today. And thank you so much for sharing your trickster cracks with us today. I was going to say trickster wisdom, but I'll avoid that word after today's conversation. And for everybody here, before we say goodbye, I just wanted to give you the heads up that our next Deep Transformation live monthly meeting on Tuesday, June 6th, you're not going to want to miss. We've got 3 leaders from this inter-country group called the Equatorial Voices Group. And they're 3 young, amazingly courageous activists out there in the world. Robert Mboizi from Uganda, who's a human rights defender who's putting his life on the line every day, sheltering, helping people who have been criminalized by LGBTQ people, criminalized by laws in Uganda. Getri Agiza of Kenya, who's a social worker, community developer, a peace activist, who takes places which have been polarized by political violence and builds dialogue and just conversations between them. And Rahul Patil of India, who's a Dalit leader and an engineer working on climate mitigation and more rights for Dalit people in India. These 3 people are all part of this amazing group. We're going to have the chance to talk with them, hear what they're doing right there on the front lines, and also look at how we can collaborate at the DTN with what they're doing, how we can learn from them and maybe support their work. So that's on Tuesday, June 6th. Don't miss it. And Bayo, I'm in love with you like the others here. And I just want to share my deep, deep gratitude, appreciation for what you bring into the world, and just look forward to more chances to connect with you in the future. With your
Thank you,
beautiful
brother.
words.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.